Imagine this. You're sitting in a room full of brilliant people, educated, well-read, technologically fluent, and someone asks a simple question that requires nothing more than 5 minutes of uninterrupted thought. The silence that follows isn't contemplative. It's uncomfortable. Faces turn toward glowing screens, fingers begin scrolling, and within seconds, the question dissolves into distraction. Not because these people lack intelligence, but because something far more insidious has happened. They've forgotten how to think. In this video, we are going to uncover one of the most uncomfortable truths of our era. How we created a stupid generation. Not because people lack intelligence, but because the very systems that shape their minds have been deliberately designed to suppress independent thought. We will explore how education, media, technology, and even culture have contributed to a silent collapse of human reasoning. And the last revelation, the most important one, will completely change the way you understand the world and your place within it. Before we begin, if you believe knowledge should liberate, not imprison, take a moment to subscribe to this channel, leave your like, and share this video. It helps spread ideas that awaken minds in a world that tries so hard to put them to sleep. I promise you, what you are about to discover might forever change how you perceive society, the future, and even yourself. Now, imagine something even more disturbing. What if this inability to engage in sustained, independent thought, the very foundation of human consciousness, has been systematically engineered, not through force or oppression, but through something far more subtle: comfort, convenience, and the illusion of knowledge. Consider the paradox we're living in. We exist in an era where the sum total of human knowledge is accessible through a device in your pocket. You can learn quantum physics while sitting on a bus, access the complete works of Plato before breakfast, or watch lectures from the world's greatest minds during your lunch break. Never before has humanity possessed such staggering access to information. And yet, never before have we been so profoundly confused, so intellectually fragile, so incapable of distinguishing truth from spectacle. How is this possible? How did we arrive at a moment where people can cite 1,000 facts but struggle to form a single original thought? Where opinions are abundant but understanding is rare? Where everyone is speaking but almost no one is truly thinking? The answer reveals something most are terrified to confront. We are living through the greatest cognitive collapse in human history, and we've celebrated every step of our descent as progress. Think about what happens to your mind in a single day. You wake to the assault of notifications, each one a small demand on your attention. You scroll through carefully curated fragments of reality, each designed to trigger an emotional response before you've even finished your first cup of coffee. You consume dozens of articles, or rather, you skim their headlines, absorbing conclusions without examining premises. You watch videos that compress complex ideas into digestible sound bites, preferring the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of genuine inquiry. You react, you share, you move on. And somewhere in this relentless current of stimulation, the capacity for deep thought quietly drowns. But here's what makes this crisis unprecedented. Previous generations could at least recognize ignorance when they encountered it. They knew what they didn't know. Today's generation has been given something far more dangerous: the feeling of being informed without the substance of understanding. We've mistaken access to information for wisdom, data consumption for knowledge, and the ability to recall facts for the capacity to think. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus warned that much learning does not teach understanding. He spoke those words 25 centuries ago, yet they've never been more prophetic. We've created a civilization of the intellectually obese, gorging on information, bloated with opinions, yet starving for meaning. What if I told you that your inability to focus isn't a personal failure but a carefully calibrated outcome? That your addiction to distraction isn't weakness, but the predictable result of systems designed by the brightest minds in psychology and neuroscience not to liberate your thinking, but to capture it? That every scroll, every click, every moment of fragmented attention is precisely what someone engineered you to do? The uncomfortable truth is this: you weren't born incapable of deep thought. You were trained into it. And the most terrifying part isn't that it happened. It's that you barely noticed. This isn't a nostalgic lament for a golden age that never existed. This is an urgent recognition that something fundamental has broken in the machinery of human consciousness. We've entered an era where thinking true, sustained, independent thinking has become not just rare, but almost revolutionary, an act of rebellion in a world built on reaction. So, before we can understand how to escape this crisis, we must first confront a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. When was the last time you actually thought, not remembered, not repeated, not reacted, but genuinely engaged in the difficult, uncomfortable, exhilarating work of original thought? If you can't answer that question, you're already living in the reality we're about to explore. A reality where consciousness itself has become optional, and the price of awakening is realizing just how long you've been asleep. The collapse didn't begin with smartphones or social media. It began much earlier, in a place most people still revere as sacred, the classroom. For centuries, education was conceived as the awakening of the soul. Socrates didn't lecture, he questioned. He believed that wisdom couldn't be transferred like cargo from one mind to another, but had to be excavated from within through relentless inquiry. The purpose of education was to teach people not what to think, but how to think, to cultivate minds capable of examining their own beliefs, challenging authority, and pursuing truth even when it led to uncomfortable places. But somewhere between the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, something sinister happened. Education transformed from liberation into production. The French philosopher Michel Foucault observed that every system of power creates its own version of truth, not to reflect reality, but to maintain control. And so, the modern education system was born, modeled not after the Academy of Athens, but after the factory floor. Children were no longer treated as minds to be awakened, but as raw materials to be processed. Sit in rows, memorize facts, repeat on command, raise your hand for permission to speak, question nothing, obey everything. The goal wasn't to create independent thinkers, but compliant workers, people who could follow instructions without asking why those instructions existed in the first place. This wasn't an accident. It was architecture. The Prussian education model that most Western schools adopted was explicitly designed to produce obedient citizens and efficient soldiers. Creativity was punished. Curiosity was suppressed. Conformity was rewarded, generation after generation. We forged minds that feared error more than they valued truth, that craved approval more than they sought understanding. Carl Jung warned about this psychological conditioning. He spoke of the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of archetypes and patterns that shape how societies think and behave. But he also warned of something darker, the death of individuation, the process by which a person becomes fully themselves. When education systems prioritize uniformity over uniqueness, they don't just limit what people know, they limit who people can become. The result is a peculiar kind of intelligence, brilliant at passing tests, fluent in memorized information, yet utterly lost when faced with ambiguity, complexity, or original thought. We've created minds that can calculate but cannot contemplate, that can access data but cannot synthesize meaning, that can repeat arguments but cannot construct them. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this coming over a century ago. He wrote about the last man, the final evolution of humanity into beings who seek only comfort, who avoid all risk, who no longer aspire to greatness because aspiration itself has become uncomfortable. The last man, Nietzsche warned, is the one who has forgotten how to create, how to struggle, how to think deeply. Instead, he blinks contentedly in his mediocrity, believing he has discovered happiness. Does that sound familiar? Look around. How many people do you know who actively avoid difficult conversations, challenging books, or ideas that might disturb their carefully constructed worldview? How many prefer the numbing comfort of entertainment to the electric discomfort of genuine reflection? This is the hidden foundation of our crisis. We didn't lose the ability to think through some external catastrophe. We were systematically trained to surrender it. The system didn't fail us. It succeeded perfectly at what it was always designed to do. It created generations of people who can function efficiently within predetermined structures, but cannot question those structures themselves. And now, those minds brilliant, educated, but fundamentally conditioned, have inherited a world of infinite information, with finite capacity to process it meaningfully. The trap was set long before the first notification ever appeared on a screen. The tragedy of a conditioned mind isn't that it cannot think it's that. It doesn't realize it has stopped thinking. Like a bird raised in a cage who never learns to fly, we've adapted so completely to our mental constraints that we mistake them for natural limitations. Consider what happens when you encounter information today. Your brain, shaped by years of digital conditioning, has been rewired for a specific type of processing: fast, shallow, and reactive. Neuroscientists have documented this transformation. The constant barrage of notifications, the endless scroll, the dopamine hit of every like and share, these aren't just habits. They're neural pathways being carved deeper with each repetition, fundamentally altering how your brain processes reality. This is what psychologists call cognitive offloading. Why remember when you can Google? Why think deeply when you can skim summaries? Why form your own opinion when thousands of others are readily available? Each time you outsource a mental task, you weaken the neural networks responsible for that function. The brain, like a muscle, atrophies when unused. And we've been systematically unusing the parts of our brain responsible for sustained attention, critical analysis, and independent reasoning. But the consequences run far deeper than mere distraction. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. The unseen consequence of our cognitive collapse is that we've lost the ability to see targets that aren't immediately visible. We've become a civilization of intellectual marksmen, hitting only what's placed directly in front of us, incapable of imagining what might exist beyond our line of sight. This manifests in subtle but devastating ways. You begin to notice that conversations have become shallower. People exchange information but rarely explore ideas. Relationships feel more transactional, reduced to the currency of likes and comments rather than genuine connection. Political discourse degenerates into tribal allegiance rather than principled debate. Everyone has opinions, but few can articulate the reasoning behind them. Ask someone why they believe what they believe, and watch them become defensive rather than reflective. This is the phenomenon Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith. The act of deceiving yourself to escape the anxiety of genuine choice and responsibility. When thinking becomes difficult, we retreat into prepackaged ideologies, letting others think for us. We join tribes not because we've examined their principles, but because belonging feels safer than standing alone. We adopt beliefs not through contemplation, but through repetition and social pressure. The confirmation bias that results is staggering. Algorithms feed you content that confirms what you already believe. Your social circles echo your existing opinions back to you. Dissenting voices are filtered out, blocked, or dismissed as threats rather than opportunities for growth. You live in a perfect bubble of self-reinforcing certainty, never realizing that certainty without examination is just another word for ignorance. Aldous Huxley predicted this in his dystopian vision, not a world where books are burned, but where they're simply ignored because people are too distracted by pleasure to care about truth. He wrote that the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. The perfect dictatorship, he warned, would feel like freedom. And here we are, free to choose from infinite options, yet somehow all choosing the same things. Free to speak, yet saying nothing of substance. Free to think, yet letting others do our thinking for us. The most insidious consequence of all? Most people will read these words, feel a momentary discomfort, and then scroll on, proving the very point being made. The capacity for sustained self-reflection, for sitting with uncomfortable truths long enough to transform them into wisdom, has been systematically eroded. But erosion, unlike destruction, can be reversed. The question is, do you still have the courage to begin? The path to reclaiming your mind begins with a single radical act: silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. True, deliberate, uncomfortable silence. This is the first rebellion against a world engineered to keep you perpetually distracted. In silence, something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear the mechanisms of your own conditioning. The urge to reach for your phone, the anxiety that surfaces when there's nothing to do, the strange discomfort of being alone with your thoughts. These aren't personality traits. They're symptoms of a captured consciousness. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that no man is free who is not master of himself. Freedom doesn't begin with changing your circumstances. It begins with reclaiming sovereignty over your attention. Every moment you resist the compulsion to scroll, to check, to consume, you're not just breaking a habit, you're rewiring neural pathways. You're teaching your brain that it can exist without constant stimulation. Start small, but start deliberately. Spend 10 minutes each day in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, no screens. Just you and the previously unbearable discomfort of your own company. At first, your mind will revolt. It will generate anxiety, convince you this is wasted time, flood you with urgent tasks that suddenly seem critical. This resistance is proof you're doing something your conditioning fears. Then comes the resurrection of curiosity, the fuel that powers all genuine thinking. But not the shallow curiosity of clicking headlines. Deep curiosity, the kind that asks why 5 times in succession until you reach the bedrock of understanding. Children possess this naturally before we train it out of them. Every great mind in history, from Leonardo da Vinci to Marie Curie, maintained this childlike wonder into adulthood, refusing to accept surface explanations when deeper truths beckoned. Practice asking questions that don't have immediate answers. Not, what's the weather? But, why do I feel anxious when I'm not productive? Not, what's trending? But, what assumptions am I making about success that I've never examined? These questions can't be Googled. They require something rare and precious: contemplation. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something profound about human nature. He wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The entire machinery of modern distraction is designed to eliminate that space, to make you react instantly, emotionally, predictably. Reclaim that space. When you feel the urge to respond immediately to a message, to post an impulsive reaction, to fill every quiet moment with noise, pause. Just 5 seconds. In that pause, consciousness awakens. You shift from being a machine that reacts to becoming a mind that chooses. Embrace solitude as a spiritual practice. Not loneliness, solitude. All profound thought requires withdrawal from the noise of collective opinion. Nietzsche wrote his most revolutionary ideas while walking alone in the mountains. Buddha achieved enlightenment in isolated meditation. Newton developed his laws of motion during a plague quarantine away from Cambridge. Solitude isn't deprivation. It's the necessary condition for original thought. Read slowly. 1 page of Dostoevsky contemplated deeply is worth more than 100 headlines absorbed mindlessly. Write by hand. The physical act of writing slows thought enough to make it coherent. Engage in conversations where the goal isn't to win, but to understand. Seek out people who challenge your beliefs rather than confirm them. Most importantly, cultivate the courage to be wrong. The fear of error is the death of learning. Every breakthrough in human understanding began with someone willing to be publicly mistaken, to question consensus, to stand intellectually alone. Independent thought isn't a natural state. It's an achievement earned through continuous effort. This rebellion isn't against technology or modernity. It's a rebellion against unconsciousness itself. And it begins the moment you decide that thinking true, difficult, transformative thinking is worth the discomfort. There is a moment that comes to those who genuinely awaken, a moment so destabilizing, so utterly paradigm-shattering, that many choose to retreat back into comfortable numbness rather than face it. This is that moment. The ultimate truth isn't that we created a stupid generation. It's far more profound and far more terrifying. We created a generation perfectly suited to a world that no longer needs human consciousness at all. Think about what consciousness actually is: not intelligence, but something far rarer. Consciousness is the capacity to observe yourself, it's the ability to stand outside your own thoughts and examine them. It's the rare and precious faculty that separates the human being from the biological automaton, and we are witnessing its voluntary extinction. But here's the revelation that most will refuse to accept. This wasn't done to us. We did it to ourselves. The algorithms didn't arrive like invaders from Mars. We invited them in. The technology didn't force itself into our hands. We reached for it. The systems of control didn't need to be imposed. We constructed them ourselves, believing the entire time that we were progressing toward freedom. This is the cruelest joke of modernity. We have become our own jailers, and the bars of our prison are made entirely of comfort. Aldous Huxley understood this truth profoundly. He wrote that A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of the political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. We live in that state now, not imposed by external tyrants, but constructed by ourselves, one notification at a time. But the deeper realization, the one that separates genuine awakening from mere intellectual posturing, is this. The tragedy isn't that your thinking has been captured. The tragedy is that you've been given the illusion of choice while having surrendered the capacity to exercise it. Consider the paradox. You have unprecedented access to information, yet you feel less informed. You have infinite options, yet fewer genuine choices. You are more connected than ever before, yet profoundly isolated. You have more words at your disposal than any generation in history, yet fewer meaningful things to say. This isn't contradiction. This is the carefully engineered outcome of systems designed by geniuses not to oppress you externally, but to fragment you internally. The ultimate truth is that stupidity isn't the absence of intelligence. It's the inability to think in ways that matter. And we've created a civilization perfectly optimized for that particular form of stupidity. We've built a world that doesn't require you to think. It only requires you to respond. Respond to notifications. Respond to outrage. Respond to trends. Respond to the carefully manufactured crises that demand your emotional reaction but never your rational contemplation. Those who built these systems weren't acting out of malice. They were following the inexorable logic of capitalism and technological efficiency. Why create a person capable of independent thought when you can create a person capable of being influenced? Why design systems that liberate when you can design systems that monetize? Why enable consciousness when you can harvest attention? And the genius of it, the diabolical genius, is that we did it all voluntarily, feeling like we were becoming more free with each surrender. But now comes the part that separates those who will genuinely awaken from those who will sleep forever. What you do with this knowledge. Because there are only two paths from this point forward. The first path is the one most will take. You will read these words, feel a moment of existential vertigo, and then retreat. You'll tell yourself that society is too big to resist, that individual effort doesn't matter, that the system is inevitable. You'll find reasons why you can't change technological determinism, economic necessity, social pressure. And in finding those reasons, you'll simply construct a more sophisticated prison, one with better locks and more comfortable cells. You'll become one of the people who understands the trap intellectually but accepts it practically. You'll be conscious enough to suffer, but not conscious enough to rebel. The second path is radical and difficult. It requires you to accept something most are unwilling to accept, that your awakening will be lonely, that thinking independently in a world designed for conformity will isolate you, that the people you love most might think you're becoming strange, obsessive, difficult, that reclaiming consciousness isn't a feel-good journey, it's an existential crucible. But those who choose this path discover something extraordinary. They become fully human again. This isn't metaphor. When you reclaim the capacity for sustained thought, when you resist the architecture of distraction, when you ask questions that can't be answered in a tweet, something shifts at the deepest level of your being. The constant static of external noise begins to fade, and beneath it, you hear something that seemed lost forever. Your own voice. Not the voice you've been taught to use in public, not the voice designed by algorithms to gain approval, but your authentic voice. The one that emerges only in genuine solitude. And that voice will say things you didn't know you believed. It will want things you thought you'd forgotten how to want. It will question things you'd accepted as permanent truth. That voice is consciousness returning. The final, most devastating realization is this. Freedom was never what you thought it was. Freedom isn't the ability to choose from infinite options while remaining psychologically unchanged. True freedom is far more threatening. It's the capacity to change who you are based on what you genuinely understand. It's the willingness to stand against the current, to think thoughts that disturb your own peace, to live according to your own examined values rather than inherited assumptions. Most people will never experience this freedom. They will live and die as sophisticated biological machines, efficient and content, never knowing what they missed. But you, if you have, the courage can still choose differently. The last stage of awakening isn't intellectual, it's practical. It's the decision, made in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, to claim back your mind, not through some grand gesture, but through 10 minutes of silence tomorrow, through one difficult book, through one conversation where you actually listen instead of wait for your turn to speak, through one moment where you resist the compulsion to distract yourself. The consciousness you've surrendered didn't disappear. It's been dormant, waiting for you to remember that you have the power to think again. The question is no longer whether it's possible to awaken. The question is whether you're willing to endure the discomfort of becoming fully conscious in a world that profits from your sleep. Everything depends on your answer.